Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. It's Cynicalex, and today we're going to be diving into the storyline of Excalibur, which we believe the upcoming Marvel Future Fight update is heavily based on. Now, this is a pretty cool storyline. It features a lot of recognizable mutants, including the new Gambit uniform, Betsy Braddock, who could be getting a brand new look as well. We got Rogue, Jubilee, Apocalypse, and Richter, some new mutants as well. This storyline is birthed out of Dawn of X, which is sort of everything that happens after House of X and Powers of 10. So I strongly recommend that you read those and you get brushed up on them before you dive into this, because it will just make a lot more sense. There's a lot of background information about the new, basically, mutant status quo. Jonathan Hickman basically reset everything. Mutants have their own island called Krakoa. I'm going to give you like the Cold Notes version right now, but basically, mutants have their own island, Krakoa, and they can endlessly revive, so they're all basically immortal. And they're protected, and they're not being hunted yet by anyone, so it's pretty much paradise for mutants right now on Krakoa, but there of course are problems everywhere else. And the other cool thing is all the mutants are working together, so that's why you see Apocalypse here side by side with Gambit and Rogue. You've got Mr. Sinister on the island, you've got, you know, Omega Red, you've got Professor X, Magneto. Of course, people have their own agendas. There's still going to be machinations and stuff like that, but for now, they're all working together for now. So yeah, Excalibur is one of the series that came out of Dawn of X. Excalibur also relates to X of Swords or 10 of Swords, because Excalibur swords, etc. And I actually do think that this update might be more based on X of Swords or 10 of Swords than Excalibur. But we'll talk about Excalibur first, because that is where we do see the first look at Gambit's new uniform that we've already seen confirmed in game. Now, before we get started on that, of course, this video is brought to you by you guys. Thank you guys so much for smashing the like button on my previous video, not in the previous sneak peek, but the one before that, where I mentioned if you guys wanted to see a synopsis like this, and well over 2,000 likes hit on that video, and 2,000 likes was the bar there. So I wanted to thank you guys for doing that, and I really appreciate you supporting these types of videos. Hopefully you enjoy them. The only other thing I need to say, the only other PSA is, of course, heavy spoilers for the comics. This comic came out, I believe, October 2019, so it's been out for a little bit now, but the issues are still being released. I believe it's up to issue 17 or 18, and it was last released, like the most current issue was January 27th of this year. So if you want to get caught up, of course, the best way to do it is to go to your local comic book store or do a curbside pickup. Support local, support your comic book stores so that publishers can keep making more awesome comics. And of course, heavy spoilers. And last but not least, this is not my regular type of video, so I may struggle to, you know, present this information to you guys. I'm going to do my best. I actually wrote out a bit of a script, which I normally never do for my videos. Like 99% of my videos are just off the top of my head. But for this one, I felt like I needed to do a lot more work in the background because there's just so much information, and I want to give you guys all the most important parts so you know this story backwards and forwards without actually having to spend all the time reading it and going through every single speech bubble. So, with all of that being said, first things first, we actually have to go somewhere else. So I explained Krakoa and the mutants, but this story actually starts somewhere else entirely. Somewhere else being Otherworld. Now, the Otherworld is basically the myth of Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. Basically, that entire sort of mythology with Merlin and magic and all that stuff, that's what Otherworld is. But Otherworld doesn't exist as like another planet. It's actually another dimension, but it's actually also apparently outside of the multiverse. So you've got like our dimension 616, and you've got the multiverse of other dimensions. Otherworld doesn't really adhere to any of those rules. There aren't multiple copies of Otherworld, as I understand it, in the multiverse. There's just one Otherworld, and it just sort of sits there in its own dimension, close to, adjacent to Earth. I'm not exactly sure, but yeah, that's basically what it is. And now Otherworld is being ruled, at least in this castle, in this region, by Morgan Le Fay. So Morgan Le Fay gets introduced as a potential villain right away, and she's basically taking over for King Arthur, because Arthur Pendragon is missing. So King Arthur's not around. Morgan Le Fay decides to take over, and Morgan Le Fay is having some issues because her realm seems to be getting invaded by these flowers. And these flowers, if you've read House of X, Powers of 10, look very familiar to what you see in Krakoa. So obviously there's a Krakoan gate that's interfering with the Otherworld realm, but Morgan Le Fay doesn't seem to know that. She doesn't know that it's mutants, she doesn't know that it's a Krakoan gate, and she just wants to get the problem solved. Okay, so we're gonna scroll through here a little bit so I can go back and just discuss this a little bit further, because the story jumps back and forth, and I'd rather just explain one side and then the other. So at this, a little bit later, not at the same time, a little bit later, we get introduced to this brand new character, Mariana, just a regular human, and she's part of this coven, the Coven Solar Blackwood, and they're doing some sort of ritual. They're trying to contact ghosts. I don't know, some Ouija board stuff here. And they actually end up summoning or getting the attention of Morgan Le Fay. This normally wouldn't be that interesting or that important, but Morgan Le Fay, through all of these speech bubbles, and trust me, this series has a ton of speech bubbles, she explains that she can basically cut off their use of magic whenever she wants. So in the Marvel Universe, as best as I understand it, magic, unless you're channeling magic from someone else, like, you know, Doctor Strange channels magic from the Wand of Watum, like Watum or whatever. You have magic from Sidorak. You have where Scarlet Witch gets her magic from. If you can't channel magic from somewhere, there's not that many people that can just actually do magic on their own. But Morgan Le Fay is one of those. She's an extremely powerful, extremely old magic user. She's like a witch, basically. She taught Doctor Doom. She was going to take over for Doctor Strange. Like, she's super strong, and she's been around for a long time. So she basically reveals that she can just turn the tap off and just cut off their supply, their access to magic, which is a pretty big deal and will come into play later when we find out what Apocalypse is trying to do with magic and mutant magic. So basically, Morgan Le Fay says, you know what, this gate is interfering with my realm, my other world, I need you to get rid of it. And Mariana's like, are you, duh, you don't know that these are mutant gates, you don't know about Krakoa? And Morgan Le Fay's like, I don't care what it is, just get rid of it. So that's basically how she gets introduced, and how she sort of gets pinned as the titular villain, but not really. At the same time, we get reintroduced to Betsy Braddock. Now, I haven't been following comics that closely, but essentially, they've reset Betsy back into her Caucasian body. She was before in an Asian body. Again, I don't know a lot about this. I don't know the ins and outs, but now that's why she doesn't want to be referred to as Psylocke when she goes through the gate to Krakoa. She just wants you to call her Betsy. So I'm just going to be referring to her as Betsy or someone else, but not Psylocke. And that's sort of the reason why. She seems to be transitioning away from her life as Psylocke and what she did as a mutant to just being Betsy. But her powers are all the same, and she's essentially the same person, except her body does look a little bit different. Then we see Apocalypse. And Apocalypse is basically doing something in the background. He's got Rogue and Gambit involved, and he's working with these crystals, and these crystals are basically he's trying to use these crystals to empower this gate to go to Otherworld. So even though Morgan Le Fay doesn't know about Otherworld, Apocalypse does, and he's trying to get there, but he can't, which is pretty weird. And we don't know why he's trying to get there either, but he's got a plan, and he knows someone that can go to Otherworld and sort of breach the gate. So what does he do? Well, he gets Captain Britain, which is... Oh, we skipped ahead a little bit too far. He gets Captain Britain, who is Betsy's brother, Brian Braddock, who we could be seeing as a new character. At the same time, they revive Jamie Braddock. So this is basically a reunion of the Braddock family. So obviously, Psylocke, Betsy, is not too happy to see her brother. Jamie, for those of you that don't know, who's right there, is an Omega level mutant capable of expansive reality manipulation. So he is extremely powerful, an extremely useful mutant to have, and a bit scary when you consider his powers combined with Apocalypse's ambitions. But yeah, so they're basically in tow, and Betsy's not having any of it. She goes to Apocalypse, and he explains the plan. We want to go to Otherworld, and we need your brother. So then Betsy reunites with Brian, and they go to Otherworld, and they transform. And so we could be seeing Captain Britain as a new character, which would be really cool. They get to Otherworld. There's a lot of information in this first issue here. They get to Otherworld, and it's not so good. Morgan Le Fay is not happy, and she makes it very well known that Brian is supposed to be taking orders from her because he's Captain Britain, and he's supposed to be protecting Britain and Otherworld because they're sort of connected. We have a little scene here with Rogue and Gambit, not too important, but basically they're gearing up for a fight, and Apocalypse is basically warning them that they might have to save Betsy from the portal. He can sort of sense that something's going wrong already. We flash back to Otherworld, and look what happened. Apocalypse was right. They're having a huge fight, huge brawl. In the middle of the brawl, Morgan Le Fay decides, you know what, I'm going to corrupt Captain Britain, and I'm going to turn him into this corrupted knight. So he turns into a corrupted knight. He doesn't want to use the Amulet of Right anymore, and I'll explain what that means a little bit later. But yeah, so Apocalypse is like, okay, we have to save her. So he uses Rogue, and this is where Rogue and Gambit come into play. He uses Rogue to absorb or try to, weaken the gate so that they can pull things through and sort of save Betsy. Betsy takes her cue to instead destroy the gate, that pool at the beginning. And the backlash of energy damage hits Rogue. She absorbs all of it, and then Rogue goes into a coma. So now Rogue's in a coma. And apparently this is not the first time that Rogue has been in a coma. So yeah, pretty cool. But also kind of scary for Gambit. He's kind of pissed, obviously. That leaves Betsy alone with Morgan Le Fay, and she's obviously way outmatched. She cannot take her brother and Morgan Le Fay 1 versus 2, not even 1 versus 1. But it seems like Brian still has some control over his brain because he gives her the amulet, his amulet of right, that makes him Captain Britain, and he smashes her back to Krakoa. So she's in a coma, Gambit is pissed, and then boom, we get this brand new uniform for Psylocke looking absolutely sick. I would love it if Psylocke got this uniform to be the new Captain Britain, which is absolutely amazing. And so she basically has the amulet of right now, which transforms her into Captain Britain, and I think it confers the powers of Captain Britain, which is like flight, durability, energy projection, stuff like that. At the same time, this girl Mariana is lurking around with these energy crystals that are very similar to the ones Apocalypse was using, and she has killed her friends, nice, and she's now working for the Coven Akaba. Now, from what I understand, again, I don't know it backwards and forwards, inside and out, but the Coven Akaba is very closely linked to Apocalypse, and they usually either worship Apocalypse or they fight with Apocalypse. So pretty interesting. We don't know exactly what side of the coin they're on this time, but we'll have to see. Now we jump on to issue 2 here. There's some information here that's just not that germane to the story. It's just sort of like foreshadowing between the Braddock twins and Apocalypse. But basically, the crew, the Excalibur crew, is trying to help Rogue. So they're going to Betsy's old family lighthouse, like their lineage, their lighthouse that they had there. And so it's Gambit, Rogue, Kitty Pryde, that's the new Kitty Pryde, Jubilee, her baby, Shogo, and Gambit and Betsy. They get attacked, but they do make it to the lighthouse just fine. Betsy finds out that there are Druids. So these are like basically not exactly the opposite of the Coven Akaba, but the Druids are in green capes, and the Coven Akaba are in red capes. The Druids seek to protect the land and the living, and the Coven Akaba apparently wants to destroy the land and destroy the living. And so they were the ones that set fire to the Braddock lighthouse. At the same time, Rogue becomes the lighthouse. So now Rogue is literally at the top of a brand new lighthouse that just got erected from the ground. So yeah, that's a thing, which is kind of cool. We have a couple of dream sequences later on with Jubilee dreaming about her baby, and then we have Captain Britain, Betsy, dreaming with a flaming fox with a sword, which looks real, dog fox, I don't know what that is, but it looks really cool. Anyways, we have a couple dreams. We have a dream with Apocalypse as well, and then they get attacked by the Coven Akaba at the lighthouse. Apocalypse decides to intervene in the fight and basically saves them. But then Apocalypse is like, listen, I have a plan. You guys have to go to Otherworld. I'll stay here and protect Rogue. Gambit doesn't like the plan, but whatever. So Jubilee, her baby, Gambit, Betsy go through the portal. And then Jubilee's baby turns into a dragon. Yes, the Deus Ex Machina is strong in this storyline. But yeah, it's really cool because when they travel, they change how they look, and they look sort of more medieval, which is kind of cool. So I do like that aspect of it. Moving on to the third issue, there's a lot less that happens in these issues, so like lots of important facts, so we'll just go through them a little bit more briefly. In the third issue here, we get introduced to Richter, and Richter is a mutant who has geokinesis or seismokinesis powers, so he can control the earth, which is really, really cool. He's just sort of hiding. He's literally putting himself in an earth coffin because he can't control his powers, so that's how we're introduced to him. He's sort of, on the fritz. At the same time, Morgan Le Fay continues to communicate with Mariana, just sort of rolling the plot along, nothing too important. At the same time, Shogo is flying the Excalibur crew to Morgan Le Fay's castle to save her brother Brian. They're trying to rescue Brian from the corruption. So they arrive there, and we get our first look at the fully corrupted Brian Braddock, who looks like the villain from Mad Max. Pretty good movie. So that's pretty cool. They engage in a fight, an all-out brawl. So all these, soldiers, all these medieval soldiers from Otherworld versus the Excalibur crew. The fight's not going too well, so Jubilee decides to tell her baby, who's a dragon, to breathe fire everywhere. The fire is going to have unintended consequences, but in the meantime, we get a super badass fight between Brian Braddock looking like... I mean, if we got a uniform like this for him, that would be absolutely dope, but I doubt we're going to get him as Captain Britain. and then this, you know, completely visually altered uniform. It's a very short-lived look for him, unfortunately, but it's really cool. So he fights with his sister, you know, brother versus sister, familia a familia. They battle, the dragon spews flames everywhere, and then we think that everything's fine because they've escaped, but everything is not fine because of this story. At the same time, Apocalypse is sort of doing his thing. The lighthouse looks more and more like a Krakoan gate, and he's you know, he's writing in his journal. He's doing his apocalypse type things. You know, he's planning something. He's playing with these crystals that are not working, not enough power in them, and he's planning something. So he travels through a gate, and he gets Richter. He just pulls up and is like, yo, come with me. At the same time, he also recruits Pete Wisdom, who is another mutant who works for MI13, which is like the British version of MI or FBI, like MI6, but I guess 13 is like twice as important or whatever, or twice and +1. Anyways, he's also a mutant because he goes through the Krakoan gate and meets Richter as well. So moving on to the 4th issue here. Pretty cool artwork, I have to say. Rogue is still in a coma, yeah, and now the Excalibur crew has to visit Buckingham Palace because Betsy is the new Captain Britain, so they have to sort of make amends or like just introduce themselves to the Queen or whatever. That gives the story enough time to shoehorn in this like anti-mutant reaction from the crowd because they don't want Captain Britain, who's supposed to be human and protect the humans of Britain, to be a mutant. So it's just sort of the cliche trope about the racial undertones between humans and mutants. It doesn't go very well. There's some drama. There's like a bit of a scuffle. It's not a fight. It's a bit of a scuffle. But anyways, Betsy agrees to meet with the people at Buckingham Palace. At the same time, Apocalypse is just progressing his plan further and further. There's some stuff here with Jamie. It's not that important. And so he's progressing his plan on Krakoa while he sent Richter and Gambit over to collect more of those energy crystals. So we saw Mariana with a bunch of energy crystals that were glowing purple. We've seen Apocalypse with energy crystals that are blue, but he probably wants the more glowy ones, right? The more glowy, the more power. So Gambit and Richter find out that they're actually robbing from Druids. So now we start to see the pieces fall into place. The Druids that protected Betsy and warned her about the lighthouse are also the Druids that are protecting these ancient crystals. By the way, did I mention these ancient crystals are bones? They're mutant bones. Yeah, mutants that died thousands of years ago, their bones got turned into these energy crystals. So it seems like Apocalypse is trying to use these energy crystals to power gates in some sort of magical way, because otherwise mutants don't really have any way to tap into magic, as it were, in the universe. So the Druids pull up, they have a little bit of a scuffle, then they recognize Richter's, you know, geokinesis powers, so they're like, yo, bro, you're a Druid! So they, you know, adorn him with leaves, and they do all this stuff. Actually, those leaves look very similar now that I look a little bit closer. But anyways, they get some of these super glowy crystals, but then Richter has a malfunction with his powers, and him and Gambit fall down this giant fissure in the ground. Flat, you know, skip back over to the meeting that Betsy's supposed to be having with Pete and these associates or whatever, representatives of the Queen, and turns out it was all a setup. It's like racially charged messages here and words, tons of text. It's really not that important, but basically they were working with the Coven of Kaba, and they were trying to distract Betsy on purpose because something bad was happening out there in the world at the same time they were having their meeting. That fire, right, the dragon fire that Shogo had caused when they were battling in Otherworld, this dragon fire actually had the unintended consequence of destroying the barrier between Otherworld and Earth. So now all these mythical creatures like the Hydra, etc., the Chimera, they're all flooding into Earth and attacking. So now they have an opportunity, Coven of Kaba, to spin this problem as, you know, it's because the new Captain Britain is a mutant. It's because of Krakoa. Krakoa's the problem. Mutants are the problem. We got to get rid of mutants. So again, it goes back to the typical cliche of like humans versus mutants, but you know, it is what it is. It's not a bad piece of storytelling. So at the same time, these monsters go and attack the lighthouse to try to destroy Apocalypse, destroy Rogue. But then Rogue wakes up. So now stuff is about to go down. Just wait until you see what Rogue looks like. It's gonna be so sick. So okay, Rogue wakes up. This is the next issue here. It starts to get really spicy. Rogue wakes up, and yeah, Rogue wakes up. Anyways, Richter and Gambit are falling. Richter saves them. Obviously, they survive. They appear near the lighthouse, I believe, or just somewhere. Yeah, I think it's near the lighthouse. and they battle all these like creatures that came from Otherworld. Betsy is trying to protect Pete in Otherworld. Rogue has her own fever dream, again with this flaming fox dog, and also with Apocalypse and Sentinels, which is a bit of foreshadowing. There's actually a lot of foreshadowing here. These are some of my favorite panels, not only because of the drawings, but also because of the storytelling. I feel like it's a lot less, what do you call it? It doesn't explain everything. It's not just exposition. It's not just expositive storytelling. It's more symbolic storytelling. We go back to the fight, and obviously they're just destroying these monsters and trying to, you know, save Rogue and everything, because Rogue still hasn't woken up. Then this giant tentacle thing slams into the lighthouse, so Gambit assumes that Rogue is dead, but she's not. And then we find out that Rogue makes this hilarious joke. Rogue is actually pretty funny. They call it going rogue. I don't want to spoil the whole joke, just the punchline. But basically, Rogue figures out a way out of the dream, and she finds this this chair, and she reveals that the dog's name is Rachel. So if you guys can guess which mutant is this, that would be dope. So she sits in the chair, and then we see this very evocative symbolism here with the 4 or whatever, however many heads. We've got 2 suns and 2 moons. There's an X on the ground, and then Rogue's in the middle. And this is from the Grimoire of, or this is very close to what's in the Grimoire of Apocalypse. So it seems like Apocalypse is trying to invoke some sort of mutant magic, and he's using Rogue and her powers as the apex conduit, which is pretty interesting. So we flash back here, and Gambit thinks Rogue is dead, so he goes to attack Apocalypse. Of course, what would you do if your wife was just destroyed in some dumb plot by this big blue idiot? Rogue wakes up after Apocalypse slams Gambit into the ground, seemingly killing Gambit. So Gambit and Rogue basically switch places. The crystals start losing energy, so Apocalypse is pissed, and he's pissed at Richter. And then Gambit seems to be dead. So who shows up? Boom! Rogue shows up, and she's like, listen, sugar, you're dead. And she's really pissed at Apocalypse, rightfully so. So she beats the living snot out of Apocalypse, which is amazing. And then she starts draining his powers. And now this is really important, because this is what Apocalypse wanted. In all this chaos, this was exactly what Apocalypse wanted. So as you're reading it, you sort of get the feeling that Apocalypse is playing like 4D chess with all of these pieces and all these people. He says, yes, do it. And he says, complete the ritual. Kill me, Rogue. Take my power. Because Apocalypse says the crystals are made from mutant bones thousands of years old. My bones, his bones, are older. So what happens? There's a huge blast of energy. The gate gets secured. So the gate that Apocalypse was working on for so long, a gate to Otherworld, has finally been secured. They can't destroy the gate anymore. It's a gate that's going to be there forever. And you can see it's got the X on it. Really cool. And then take a look at Apocalypse. Excuse me. Take a look at the new Rogue. How sick is that? If there was one look better in this comic series than Betsy as Captain Britain, it is Rogue as Apocalypse. Now, I'm not saying I want Rogue to get this uniform, but how sick would she look if she did get this uniform? And then we also get a little bit more information, because Rogue reveals that when she absorbed Apocalypse, she absorbed his memories, and she knows part of his plan now. By the way, she killed Apocalypse. She absorbed his memories, so she knows his plan. He doesn't just want to stop Morgan Le Fay in Otherworld. He wants the throne of Otherworld that Morgan Le Fay is occupying. So Apocalypse's plans are getting bigger and bigger, which is pretty dope. So then we get to, I believe, the final chapter in this sort of mini arc. It is 17 issues right now, but I believe this arc is sort of like the first part of it, so I will wrap it up here on issue 6. There's obviously a lot more to it, but, you know, for brevity's sake, I don't want this video to be, you know, an hour long. So we get back to Krakoa, and of course Apocalypse is revived, because that's what mutants do now in Krakoa. And he has a bit of a conversation with Professor X, but he's not really listening to him because Jamie Braddock is there. And now they seem to be openly flaunting their sort of allegiance. So Apocalypse and Jamie dip, leaving Professor X alone, wondering what is Apocalypse really planning. Fair enough. And then we start to see things fall into place. So we come back to Otherworld, and there's another battle ensuing between Morgan Le Fay's forces and the Excalibur crew, this time with the juiced up Rogue Apocalypse combo. So they've got more, and they've got Richter there now too. So they seem like they're much more of a match for Morgan Le Fay's forces. Yo, she looks so sick. They get into a battle. Things, you know, start to sort of fall apart for both groups. And so Apocalypse shows up and he says, listen, let me help you. Let me help this situation. And he goes over and he makes a deal with Morgan Le Fay. And he says, your champion versus mine. Classic medieval one-on-one brawl to decide the fate of this universe, or the fate of this realm, this part of the realm. My champion versus yours. Brother versus sister. Twin versus twin. So Morgan Le Fay, of course, agrees because he thinks that Brian is going to kill Betsy. They have a little bit of a heart-to-heart here, Rogue and Betsy, and then they start fighting again. So we get our third battle between the Braddock twins. Again, very dope. Brian looks outstanding, and so does Betsy. Apocalypse continues his machinations. He's sort of planning things in the background. We get this extended clip of the fight. Betsy starts to overwhelm her brother Brian, and then she accidentally kills him. At the same time, who do we see appear on the throne of Otherworld? Jamie Braddock. So this was Apocalypse's plan all along. He wants Jamie to wrest control over and sort of be the puppet king of Otherworld while Apocalypse does whatever he's going to do. So Jamie, now the king with his reality manipulating powers at full strength, presumably, he cages Morgan Le Fay because he's actually legit that strong. And then because Betsy asks him to, she asks him very nicely, he revives Brian. Now we start to get a bit of a handle, because haven't read that many comics featuring Jamie Braddock. We start to get a handle on just how powerful Jamie is. Because Brian's not a mutant, so he can't get brought back the way Apocalypse was brought back in Krakoa. So he would be dead if it weren't for someone like Jamie. He's kind of comedic relief. He's pretty funny, the way they draw him and the way they interact with the twins, with each other, with the family. But yeah, Jamie is super duper powerful. We get this small little prologue between Rogue and Gambit where they discuss the future of Krakoa, their future together as a married couple, the fact that one of the rules of Krakoa is to make more mutants. And Apocalypse actually talks about this in the beginning of the series, how mutants technically should be getting stronger and stronger as the generations go on because of the mixing of mutant powers. And I think that just sort of falls totally in line with who Apocalypse is as a character, because that's his whole ethos, right? That's his entire drive as a mutant is survival of the fittest and testing people and pushing them to their limits. And of course, if you have mutants that are inheriting powers from Rogue and Gambit, they would be the fittest of the fittest. But Rogue reveals she doesn't think she ever wants to have kids. So a bit of a bittersweet moment between her and Gambit. He doesn't really seem to care, and I don't know if I would care if I was married to Rogue, but it is what it is. We get a little bit of another prologue here, not prologue, anyways. We get another epilogue between Betsy and her brother, but this time it's a bit more tragic. He failed the test. So remember at the beginning when I mentioned the Amulet of Right, and that's how Captain Britain got his powers, and that's how Betsy got the powers of Captain Britain when Brian gave her the amulet? Well, there's actually two items. The test to see whether you're going to be Captain Britain or not, it would be that Merlin would show you the Amulet of Right or the Sword of Might. And the sword represents death and power, and the amulet represents wisdom and goodness and light and sort of justice. And so to be Captain Britain, you're supposed to choose the amulet, not the sword. But Brian had his test again and he failed, and he chose the sword. He was just overcome with anger. You can see there's Merlin and his daughter Roma. He was basically overcome with anger and vengeance and whatever. The violent part of him just bubbled up and he chose the sword. So he doesn't feel like he's fit to be Captain Britain anymore, but he kind of still is Captain Britain, because even if you choose the sword, you do transform into a version of Captain Britain. You just look different. By the way, he looks badass. And you get this sweet sword to go along with it. So Betsy sort of consoles him, but now they have both the sword and the amulet. So we basically now have kind of two Captain Britons, so to speak, but it seems like Brian doesn't want to be Captain Britain, so Betsy's still going to have to be Captain Britain with the amulet. To wrap everything up at the end, and it's a nice twist, Jamie goes to find Apocalypse on Otherworld and finds him doing some weird stuff here. He's experimenting on Morgan Le Fay. Yeah, and by the way, if you look clearly at the drawings, she's not dead, guys. He's experimenting on her, and she's awake. So yeah, that's why I wanted to leave it here. This is a really good turning point for what's coming next. Obviously, Apocalypse has ulterior motives, but really I think that's what's driving the story, is seeing how the other characters react to Apocalypse's decisions. and what Apocalypse is really planning, because that's sort of like the long game, trying to decipher his notes, the little bits of information he gives, along with whatever his ultimate goal would be, which would inevitably surround like some sort of test, survival of the fittest type mentality, which is basically all Apocalypse knows how to do. So could be a possible uniform for Apocalypse. I didn't even bother to mention that. Multiple looks for Rogue, Gambit, Psylocke, or Betsy, sorry, Psylocke, and possibly the introduction of Brian Braddock, or possibly even Jamie Braddock, and maybe a uniform for Morgan Le Fay. Let me know what you guys think of the synopsis. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I had a blast myself, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.